Chapter 1, The Journey Begins. It was supposed to be a simple adventure, a weekend getaway to escape the mundanity of everyday life. 7 friends, Rachel, Mark, Hannah, Chris, Lisa, Paul, and Jenny, set out on a trip to the remote Blackwood Forest. Nestled in the heart of the forest was an old lodge, reputedly abandoned but recently renovated into a rustic retreat for those seeking isolation and a touch of the wild. The journey began with laughter and excitement as they drove deeper into the woods, the cityscape gradually giving way to dense, towering trees and a sense of primordial seclusion. Rachel, always the organizer, had meticulously planned the trip, ensuring they had all the supplies they needed. Mark drove the van, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the cheerful banter of his friends. Hannah, ever the skeptic, had voiced concerns about the remote location, but even she couldn't deny the allure of a weekend away from the chaos of urban life. As they ventured further into the forest, the signal on their phones began to wane, and a sense of isolation settled over them. The road narrowed, flanked by ancient trees that seemed to lean in, whispering secrets of the forest's dark past. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily on the forest floor. "Almost there, guys," Rachel announced, her voice tinged with excitement. "Just a few more miles." The lodge finally came into view, a hulking silhouette against the twilight sky. It was larger than they had imagined, its dark wooden beams and stone facade giving it an almost menacing presence. Despite its recent renovations, the lodge retained an aura of age and mystery. They unpacked quickly, eager to settle in. The interior was surprisingly cozy, with a large stone fireplace dominating the living room, its hearth already stacked with wood. The kitchen was modern, stocked with provisions, and the bedrooms were warm and inviting. They gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter, the crackling flames casting a warm glow that seemed to push back the encroaching darkness outside. As the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep in. The wind howled through the trees, and strange, unidentifiable noises echoed from the forest. Rachel dismissed it as typical of such an old place, but Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. "Probably just animals," Paul suggested, trying to reassure everyone, though his eyes betrayed his own discomfort. They retired to their rooms eventually, the exhaustion of the journey lulling them into a restless sleep. But the forest was not silent. The night was filled with the sounds of rustling leaves, distant howls, and the occasional creak of the old lodge settling into its foundations. Chapter 2, The Disappearance. Morning broke with a chill in the air. The friends gathered in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and breakfast temporarily dispelling the unease of the previous night. They planned to explore the forest, eager to take advantage of the beautiful, albeit eerie, surroundings. They set out, following a trail that wound through the trees, the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy above. Laughter and chatter filled the air as they hiked, the beauty of the forest momentarily pushing aside any lingering fears. It was Lisa who first noticed Jenny lagging behind. She turned to call out, but Jenny was already gone, the trail behind them empty and silent. Panic set in as they called her name, their voices echoing through the trees with no response. "Maybe she just went back to the lodge," Chris suggested, though doubt tinged his words. They retraced their steps, calling out for Jenny, their anxiety mounting with each passing minute. By the time they reached the lodge, there was still no sign of her. Rachel tried to call her phone, but there was no signal. Hours passed, and the group grew more frantic. They searched the lodge and the immediate surroundings, but Jenny was nowhere to be found. As dusk approached, a sense of dread settled over them. "We need to call for help," Mark said, his usual calm demeanor slipping. But without a signal, they had no choice but to wait until morning to drive back to the nearest town. They spent a restless night in the lodge, the oppressive silence only broken by the occasional creak or distant howl. Chapter 3, The Search. Morning brought little relief. They packed up quickly, determined to get help. As they started the van, a heavy fog rolled in, obscuring the road and making the drive treacherous. Mark navigated slowly, the dense mist swallowing the forest around them. Hours passed with no sign of the main road. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole, the familiar landmarks from their journey and now unrecognizable. Panic set in as they realized they were hopelessly lost. "We should go back to the lodge," Rachel suggested. "Maybe Jenny will come back or we can find a way to contact help from there." Reluctantly, they agreed. The drive back was filled with tension, every shadow and sound amplifying their fear. When they finally reached the lodge, a collective sigh of relief was quickly replaced by horror. The front door was ajar, and the interior was in disarray. Someone, or something, had been there. Chapter 4: The Unseen Terror. The friends huddled together in the living room, the sense of security the lodge once provided now shattered. They barricaded the doors and windows, the outside world becoming increasingly sinister with every passing moment. Night fell again, and with it came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible, but growing louder as the hours ticked by. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the lodge with an otherworldly presence. "What is that?" Hannah whispered, her eyes wide with terror. No one had an answer. The whispers seemed to speak in a language none of them understood, their tone mocking and filled with malice. Shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human but twisted and grotesque. Paul, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere, decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, he ventured into the basement, convinced the source of the whispers lay there. Minutes passed in agonizing silence before a blood-curdling scream echoed through the lodge. The others rushed to the basement, only to find it empty. Paul was gone, the flashlight lying discarded on the floor, its beam casting long, eerie shadows. "We need to stick together," Mark insisted, his voice trembling. "Whatever is happening, we're stronger together." But the whispers continued, relentless and unyielding, fraying their nerves and driving them to the brink of madness. Chapter 5: The Final Stand. Desperation took hold as the remaining friends realized they had to leave the lodge, fog or no fog. With dawn approaching, they gathered their belongings, preparing to make a run for it. The forest, once a place of beauty, had become a prison. They stepped outside, the morning light barely piercing the thick fog. The air was heavy, suffused with an unnatural chill. As they made their way down the path, the whispers followed, growing louder and more insistent. Lisa stumbled, falling to the ground with a cry. Mark and Chris helped her up, but the delay had cost them. The fog thickened, and the shadows grew bolder, moving with a sinister purpose. Suddenly, Rachel let out a scream. A shadowy figure stood in their path, its form shifting and amorphous. It spoke in the same haunting whispers, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice breaking. The figure didn't answer, instead advancing slowly. In a panic, they turned and ran, the forest closing in around them. The path disappeared, replaced by a labyrinth of trees and darkness. One by one, they were picked off, swallowed by the forest and the shadows that dwelled within. Only Rachel and Mark remained, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they stumbled through the fog. "Keep going," Mark urged, his grip on Rachel's hand tightening. But the forest had other plans. The whispers grew deafening, the shadows closing in. In a final, desperate bid, they broke through the tree line, emerging into a clearing bathed in the first light of dawn. The lodge loomed ahead, a silent sentinel to their nightmare. They ran towards it, but as they reached the steps, Mark was pulled back, a shadowy hand gripping his ankle. Rachel screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony of whispers. With a final, wrenching effort, she broke free, stumbling into the lodge and slamming the door behind her. The whispers stopped, the silence more terrifying than any sound. Rachel collapsed, tears streaming down her face. She was alone. The lodge stood quiet, its secrets hidden in the shadows. The forest, once a place of adventure, had revealed its true nature. Rachel knew she couldn't stay, but the thought of leaving alone was unbearable. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the fog, she made her decision. Gathering her remaining strength, she stepped outside, determined to find her friends or die trying. The forest watched in silence, its whispers a distant memory, but its presence ever threatening. Rachel walked into the fog, the haunting echoes of Blackwood Forest following her every step.